The knock at midnight. The night was cold and silent, and only the sound of the wind moving through the tall metal trees made any noise in the far-off colony of Earth 9, where Ryan lived alone in his small bunker house on the edge of the forest. No one crossed the borders at night because the outside air burned like acid, and the sky often turned red without warning, and Ryan liked it this way because he trusted silence more than people. He was just finishing his simple dinner when the warning lights on the wall blinked once, then turned green again, which made him pause and raise his head because green meant movement outside but not dangerous. Yet he walked slowly to the main screen and tapped the sensor, and the outside camera showed something that made him forget to breathe. 3 figures stood just outside the airlock door. They were not armed, not armored, not soldiers or raiders. Instead, they looked young and scared and tired. Their clothes were torn and soaked in acid rain. Their skin shimmered faintly with alien patterns like soft glowing ink on smooth skin, and all three had large, glowing eyes full of fear and hope. At the same time, the tallest girl raised her hand and knocked again softly 3 times. Her voice cracked through the small mic near the entrance as she spoke in almost perfect Earth speak, saying, "Please, we'll be good girls. We'll work, we'll cook, we'll bond. Just let us in." Rain froze. His fingers hovered near the override button, and his assistant flashed a red warning across the screen. "Danger wanted beings detected." The AI repeated it again, but quieter. This time, as if unsure itself, he looked again at the girls. The tall one had silver hair and eyes like melting mercury and stood straight like a protector. The second was shorter with green streaks in her dark blue hair. Her hands trembled as she hugged the smallest girl, whose tiny frame barely reached her waist and who wore a glowing collar that blinked red every few seconds like a ticking bomb. They made no move to run or beg. They just stood there in the acid rain, letting it burn their skin without complaint. Ryan stared into their eyes, and something inside his chest shifted because they were not fighters. They were not criminals. They looked like runaways, and the youngest one was barely 10 cycles old. He pressed the intercom and spoke. "What are you doing out there? You'll die in this storm." The tall girl replied, "We already died the day we were born. Please let us try to live once." Ryan looked at the panel again, and the AI spoke softly. "Harboring fugitives will break colony law and may result in arrest or death." Ryan whispered, "I know," then took a deep breath and slammed his hand on the emergency override. Daughter hissed open, and the wind pushed the acid air in, but he pulled all 3 girls inside quickly and hit the seal button again. The air scrubbers roared as they cleaned the air and neutralized the toxins, and Ryan stared at the 3 girls who now knelt on his floor, dripping wet, burned but alive. The tall one stood slowly and bowed. "I am Zari. This is Luma, and the little one is Rue. Thank you for saving us. We will work and be good and not cause trouble. I swear." Ryan walked over and gave them towels and his old cloak and said, "I don't need workers. I need to know what the hell is going on." Rue looked up, her eyes wide and her voice barely a whisper. "They were going to sell me." Again, she clutched her tiny hands to her chest and began to cry without sound, just soft tears falling on the floor while the glowing collar blinked faster and faster. Zari placed her hand on Rue's shoulder and nodded. "We escaped the camp. They're tracking us. We'll Leave if you ask, but we didn't. Nowhere else to go. Ryan stared at them, and something told him this was only the beginning of something much bigger than just three girls hiding from someone. He opened a drawer and pulled out a scanner and moved it over Rue's collar. And the device beeped with a warning: ID. Locked high-value property, do not remove, and he cursed it under his breath. Softly, they weren't just aliens, they were branded and tagged, and someone, somewhere wanted them back badly. Outside, the storm grew stronger, but inside the bunker, something quiet and dangerous had begun, a bond made not by contract or law, but by choice and maybe by heart. Ryan didn't know why he did it, but he said, "You can stay here for now and sleep in the back room, but if anyone comes looking, we're all in danger." Zari nodded and helped Luma carry Rue away. And Ryan stared at the glowing collar one last time, wondering what kind of monsters had called this child a thing to be sold, and what kind of man he would become if he did nothing. Ryan sat near the edge of his sleeping unit, staring at the cracked ceiling above, while the storm outside made soft, hissing sounds across the metal roof. And inside his mind, everything felt louder than thunder, because three strange girls were now sleeping in the back room of his quiet life, and he didn't know if he had just saved them or doomed them all. The youngest one, Rue, had cried until she fell asleep, her tiny body curled on the floor like a kitten beside the warm vent, while Zari stood near her like a silent wall, and Luma had carefully washed Rue's collar burns with a cloth and soft fingers, like she had done it many times before, too many times. Ryan thought he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Zari's voice in his head, saying, "They're tracking us," and it made his skin crawl, because that meant whoever owned them had the tools to find them anywhere, and if they came here, Ryan would be seen as a criminal, a trafficker, or worse, someone who stole property. The idea made him angry, not because of the risk, but because of the word property. It felt wrong. It tasted like ash in his mouth. And when he looked at Rue's sleeping face, he saw only a child, not some object, not some tag number, just a scared little girl who should be holding toys, not wearing glowing collars. In the morning, he made hot grain cakes and sweet root drink, and left the tray on the floor near the back room without saying anything. And after some time, Zari stepped out, her silver hair now tied back in her eyes, calm but tired, and when she saw the food, she looked at him with soft surprise. "We'll clean everything," she said. "We'll cook every day, and Luma is good with machines, and Rue can sing and make light patterns if you need something to cheer you up. We can be useful, just don't send us away." Ryan shook his head. "I didn't ask for workers, I asked for truth." He motioned to the chair across from him, and Zari sat down, folding her hands like someone raised to obey and not argue. And when she finally spoke, her words were slow and heavy. "We were born in a bond camp, raised to serve, sold at age 13, and marked with property collars. They train us to speak many languages, to cook, to obey, to comfort, to bond with buyers. And when we escape, they call it a system error, not a crime, not pain, just a broken code." Ryan listened and felt something boiling deep in his chest, something like rage mixed with shame and guilt, because the galaxy he thought was more advanced was still doing this, still breaking girls into goods, still turning lives into prices. He asked, "How did you escape?" And Zari said, "We ran during a trade stop. Luma caused a fire and we slipped through a broken fence and stole scavenger pod and flew until it died in. We landed here, we thought maybe Earth. Colonists were kinder, Rian said. Earth was no heaven, and even humans sold there. Owned sometimes, and Zari nodded and said, but you opened the door and that means something to us more than you. No, in the back room. Rue had woken up and was playing with a soft towel, folding it like it was a doll and humming something slow and haunting, and when Luma joined her, the room filled with soft flickers of blue light like magic, but Rian could tell it wasn't magic, it was Rue's ability. She's not normal, Rian said quietly. Is she? And Zari replied, no, she was made that way in a lab, part Songer, part Lightwa Weaver, very rare and very wanted. We were assigned to her as bond sisters to protect her and train her. And when the buyers came early, we ran. The scanner pinged again from the corner, and the AI spoke low-level. Bounty detected 3 fugitives wanted by the Carmeth Syndicate for theft and escape. Reward active. Rian walked over and turned the speaker off. He looked at Zari and said, I'm not selling you, and I'm not sending you out into that storm either. But if we do this, then we do it together, and that means I need to know what that collar is and how to get it off. Zari smiled for the first time. It was not a big smile, but it was real, and it made her look younger, almost innocent, and she said, thank you. Human, no one ever asked us that before. Luma entered, then holding a tray of clean tools, and she said, I fixed your food processor and replaced the broken grinder in your water unit. And Rian blinked, surprised at how fast she worked. You weren't joking, he said. And Luma just grinned with sharp teeth and said, we're good girls, remember? We said we'd work that night. Rian added 3 more sleeping pads in the back room and reinforced the perimeter with old cloaking tech, and sat on his bunk holding a handheld scanner, looking at the collar code, wondering how deep this story went and how far he'd have to go to keep them safe, because they were not slaves, not anymore, not while they were under his roof, not while he was still breathing. The next day the storm was gone, but the sky still looked bruised, with red and gray clouds hanging low over the colony, and Rian stood outside near the edge of the forest, scanning the horizon while thinking about what he had done and what might come next, because helping the alien girls had turned his quiet life into something dangerous and unknown. Inside the bunker, Zari was making flat cakes, while Luma adjusted the power coils, and Rue sat on the floor drawing with a broken stylus on scraps of metal, her little fingers moving quickly as she hummed a strange song that made the lights flicker every time her voice went high. Unwatched her for a while and finally asked her, how do you do that? The lights, I mean. Rue looked up and blinked, then said softly, I don't know. I feel things and they answer me sometimes, but I can't control it, and it only works when I sing and when I'm not scared. Zari glanced at them and said quietly, they made her this way. She was born in a tube and raised with songs instead of speech, and machines instead of people. She's not supposed to think, just perform, but she's more than what they built, and we knew that from the start. Ria nodded slowly and said, the collar is dangerous. It sends out pulses every few hours like a tracker, and if they're still searching, they'll find her soon. Unless we shut it down. And Zari replied, we tried once to cut it off. It nearly burned her throat, and she didn't speak for 2 weeks. Rian frowned and opened his old toolbox, pulling out a black case with surgical instruments and scanning gear, and said, "Maybe it's time we try again, but smarter this time." And Zari said, "Only if she agrees." And Rue looked at them both and whispered, "I'm ready if you help me." They spent the next hour scanning the caller layer by layer, and the AI helped identify the frequency and defense code. It was a biolock attached to her DNA and linked to the syndicate's master chain. If anyone tried to break it by force, it would release a toxin into her blood. Ryan sighed and leaned back. "This isn't just a tracker, it's a leash with poison at the end." And Zari whispered, "We know. And that's why we ran and why we're so scared, because they don't want her back to save her. They want her back to sell her again and again until she breaks." Luma brought over a power chip and said, "Maybe we don't need to break the collar, maybe we can lie to it, make it think she's back in the system and turn it off from inside." Ryan raised an eyebrow and said, "That sounds insane." And Luma grinned and replied, "So is putting a child in chains, but here we are." They worked together for hours, routing energy through the shield core, using Rue singing to confuse the caller sensors, and Zari held her tightly the whole time, whispering soft words in her own language. And Ryan had never seen anyone care so deeply in silence without needing to prove it. Finally, the caller clicked once, then blinked yellow instead of red, and the AI said, "Caller link severed, safety mode engaged." Rue gasped and then laughed for the first time, and the lights danced across the ceiling like stars moving in rhythm with her joy. They all sat back, tired and smiling, and Rian poured drinks for everyone and said, "That's one problem solved, but we still have bigger ones coming." And Luma nodded and said, "They'll come and they'll be angry, and they won't care who you are or what you did. They'll just take us and kill you." Ryan looked at them and said, "Then we better prepare and make sure they don't get that far." That night Zari came to him holding a small disc and said, "This is everything we know about the camp where we were made and where others like us are still trapped, and you deserve to see it since you risked your life for us." And Ryan played the disc. He saw cages with young girls singing to machines while their minds were tested and bodies scanned, and he saw buyers bidding from holograms and guards laughing when one girl cried, and he felt something break inside him. He asked how many girls are still there, and Zari answered, "Too many, and they don't even know they can run because no one ever told them they were allowed to say no." Ryan stared at the screen long after it went dark and whispered, "Then maybe it's time someone told them." The next morning he stepped outside with his gear and scanned the sky again, and this time he saw something far off, a ship too slow to be passing and too quiet to be peaceful, and he knew the clock had started ticking, and the truth they had hidden was now too big to ignore. He turned back toward the bunker and whispered to himself, "Not slaves, not anymore, not ever again." Night returned like a slow-moving shadow, and the air around the bunker became thick and heavy with tension, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. And Ryan sat near the old control panel, watching the long-range scanner blink steadily, while the ship he spotted earlier drew closer to the forest edge without sending any signal or message. Zari stood beside him, her arms crossed and her silver eyes locked on the screen, while Luma silently checked the energy cores, and R slept curled up near the warm power vents with a soft smile on her face as if the caller's freedom had given her a dream she never knew she could have. But Ryan's heart beat faster with every minute because the ship was too quiet and too slow, and that meant one thing only: it wasn't here to visit, it was here to hunt. The AI whispered again. Unknown vessel approaching, no ID, no beacon, stealth configuration detected. And Rian cursed under his breath before turning to Zari and saying, "Get Rue underground, now use the back hatch in the bold tunnel and don't stop unless I call you." Zari didn't argue. She grabbed Rue gently and nodded at Luma, who tossed Rihanna pulse blaster and then followed them into the shadows without a word, because they all understood without needing to speak that the storm was no longer outside. It had arrived. Minutes passed like hours, and the scanner turned red, then died completely, and Ryan stood by the sealed door, his blaster charged and ready, while the only sound left was his own breath and the slow hum of the bunker's weak shield. Then it happened, a faint ripple in the air, a shimmer near the trees, like heat waves moving sideways, and then something stepped out of the forest, but it didn't make a sound, not a crunch, not a thud, just silence. The shape of a man wearing a black suit, covered in armor and cloaking tech, with red lights glowing near the edges of his helmet. The bounty hunter was tall, and his body moved like a shadow flowing between steps, and when he stopped 20 ft from the door, he didn't raise his weapon or shout. Instead, he tapped the air near his helmet and spoke in a calm, low voice, "Return the property and I will let you live, human. This is your only warning." Rian didn't move. He stared at the hunter through the one-way glass and felt the weight of those words, because the man wasn't bluffing. He had come alone and quiet because he knew he didn't need help, not for this job, not for a farmer. Ryan stepped out into the open before the hunter could say more, and kept his blaster lowered but ready, and said, "They're not property, and if you try to touch them, I will put you in the ground tonight." The hunter tilted his head slightly as if amused and replied, "You are brave for a man who lives in dirt and speaks like a soldier." And Ryan answered, "Maybe I was once, and maybe I still remember what it means to protect those who can't fight back." Without warning, the hunter moved, and the air crackled with energy as he fired a dart, aimed not to kill but to paralyze, and Ryan dodged, just barely rolling behind the outer storage tank and firing a shot that hit the ground near the hunter's foot, causing sparks and smoke to rise. They moved like two old predators, one fast and trained, the other desperate and angry, and the battle was not fair. But it was loud and real, and every time Ryan fell, he got back up because something inside him refused to lose. Not now, not for them. Inside the tunnel, Zari held Rue close, while Luma patched into the bunker system and said softly, "He's still fighting, we have to help." And Zari said, "How, we have no weapons?" And Luma smiled without humor and replied, "But Rue has a voice back above." Ryan ducked under a kick and slammed his blaster into the hunter's chest plate, making him stumble, and the hunter growled, "You fight like someone who forgot his own death wish." And Ryan spat back, "Maybe I remembered I had something worth dying for." Then the air around them shifted, and a soft voice echoed through the trees, not loud but clear and haunting like wind through crystal. Rue was singing from underground, and her song reached through soil and steel and hit the hunter like a wave of light. The Bounty Hunter froze mid-step and his armor flickered, his visor glitched and sparks flew from his arm and he dropped to one knee as Rue's voice filled the air. Again, this time stronger, full of fear and hope in something ancient and powerful. Ryan took his chance and launched forward, tackling the man and ripping off the control panel on his back, sending a shock wave through the suit, and the hunter screamed once before falling face first onto the ground, unconscious or worse. Zari and Luma rushed up moments later carrying Rue, and the little girl's cheeks were wet, but her eyes were glowing like stars. And she asked, "Did I do it? Did it help?" And Ryan knelt beside her and nodded. "You saved my life, little light." They tied the hunter to the landing pad and disabled his suit completely, and Luma looked at the broken armor and whispered, "They won't stop. This is just the first one." And Zari replied, "Then we get stronger before the next one comes." That night, they didn't sleep, but they sat together in the bunker, warm and tired and alive. And the stars above finally felt like they were watching, not with cold distance but with quiet approval, as if something had changed and a family had just been born from fire. The sun rose slowly over the metal trees, painting the sky in soft gold and sharp red, and inside the bunker, the silence was heavy, like smoke after a fire, because even though they had won the night before, something inside everyone had changed. Rial sat at the table sharpening a broken piece of steel, his face bruised, his arm wrapped in cloth, and his eyes full of questions he didn't know how to ask. And beside him, Rue was curled up like a cat on a blanket, her voice silent but her light still faintly glowing. Zari stood near the window, her hand resting on the frame, while Luma checked the controls and the broken scanner, and no one said much because they all felt the same thing, a storm still coming, not outside but inside their hearts. Ryan finally spoke, his voice quiet but strong. "That wasn't just any hunter. He had higher tech than I've seen in years. The Syndicate wants you bad, and they're not going to stop sending people until they get you, or until they're stopped, and I don't know which is possible." Zari turned slowly and said, "We've always known that we were born into danger, but we chose to live anyway because every minute of freedom is worth more than a lifetime of cages." Ryan slammed his fist on the table and the sound echoed through the room, making Rue jump and Luma freeze, and Zari stare with wide eyes, and his voice cracked when he said they put a child in chains and called her valuable. They burned her skin and sold her voice like a product, and no one stopped them. "Not even us," Luma whispered. "You stopped them, Ryan. You saved us." And Ryan looked down at his hands and replied, "I was too late for the one still in those camps, too late for the others who didn't run, too late for Rue's nightmares and scars, and no amount of tools or food or shelter will ever fix that." Rue stood up and walked to him slowly, her tiny hand reaching for his bruised one, and when she touched it, a warm light passed between them, not strong, not flashy, just gentle like sunlight through broken glass, and she whispered, "But you're here now, and you make it better now." Tears slid down Ryan's cheek, and he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall because he knew they weren't just for Rue or Zari or Luma. They were for every voice he never heard, every scream that went ignored, and every lost soul that never made it to his door. Zari knelt beside Rue and hugged her tight, her silver hair falling around both of them like a Blanket. And she whispered I promised her I would never let them take her again, even if it meant dying in the dirt, and I meant it. And Ryan said, then you're not alone anymore, Luma. Join them and place something on the table. It was the hunter's core chip, half cracked but still glowing. And she said, this chip contains access codes, tracking logs, contact lists. If we use this, we can find out where they're holding the other girls, and maybe, just maybe, we can break the whole chain. Ryan stared at the chip, and then at them, and asked, do you want to run or do you want to fight? Because this path will be dangerous and bloody, and if we walk it, we won't come back the same. Zari stood up, holding Rue's hand, and said, I was made to be silent, but I have a voice now, and I choose to fight. Luma nodded and added, I was built to repair and obey, but now I'll break every chain they made. And Rue simply whispered, I want to save them. Like you saved me. Ryan smiled through the tears and nodded, then let's start. And this time, we do it on our terms. They worked all night digging through the chip, building maps, making lists, finding names, and Zari whispered some of them as she read them aloud, names of girls she once knew or saw in passing, girls who were quiet or loud, scared or brave, but all of them forgotten by the galaxy. At the edge of the map was a red dot marked primary facility, and Rian stared at it and said, that's where we start. Later, when the night was deep again and the stars were brighter than usual, Ryan walked outside and looked up. His old world had been small and silent, but now it was loud and wide and burning with purpose. And inside the bunker, 3 alien girls slept, not as property, not as fugitives, but as people who had found something they never thought possible. A place to belong, a reason to hope, a man who would burn the stars before letting anyone take them again. The stolen ship flew fast through the black sky, cutting across planets like a silent shadow, and inside it Rian sat at the front seat, holding the controls tight while Zari checked the coordinates again, and Luma rewired the comm systems so they couldn't be tracked. And Rue sat quietly in the corner, humming to herself with her eyes closed, glowing faintly. As always, they were flying toward a space station hidden behind the shattered moon, a place called Refuge Delta, where survivors of war and slavery sometimes hid under false names and broken faces. And Ryan had only heard of it in stories, but now it was their only hope. The hunter's core chip had given them everything: routes, codes, names, and even a warning. The Syndicate had begun locking down facilities, moving girls before rebels or truth seekers could find them, and that meant they had to act fast or lose them forever. As they neared the station, the AI crackled to life and said, identity required, no registered ship code found. Turn back or be fired upon. And Ryan replied with a calm voice, we carry fugitives and evidence, not weapons, and we need asylum now or innocent lives will be lost. Silence followed, then a deep voice responded with one word, Doc, and the gate opened slowly like the jaws of something old and tired, but still willing to hope. Inside the station, the air was thick with metal and oil and whispers. People stared at them, not with hate but with fear and curiosity, because no one ever walked in boldly with Syndicate property and lived. And Ryan knew they had already made history just by showing up. A group of guards approached, weapons ready, until they saw Rue glowing softly behind Zari and one of them gasped and whispered, "Is that a Lightorn?" No one has seen one in years, and Zari stepped forward and said, "She is not a product, she is Rue and she is free." The headguard said, "Then prove it." No collar, no chip, no owner. Rue stepped forward slowly and reached out her hand toward the scanner and sang just a little note, a single soft sound, and the scanner exploded in sparks while flowers bloomed from the bee lights around it, glowing blue and white, and the guard fell to his knees, saying, "She has chosen, she has bonded, and not by command but by heart." Gasps filled the room and whispers turned to silence, and the council of the station was called, and they met in a quiet hall with stone floors and old flags, and Ryan stood in the center with the three girls by his side, facing elders from every part of the galaxy. One elder said, "You bring trouble and danger, and you could have led the syndicate here." And another asked, "Why risk your life? For them, they are not even human." And Ryan answered with fire in his voice, "They may not be human, but they are more kind, more brave, and more alive than any monster who ever put a price on a child." Zari stepped forward and said, "We do not beg, we offer truth, we offer memory of what they did to us, and we offer warning. If you stay silent, then you are already lost." Luma placed the core chip on the table and said, "Here is your proof. Names, locations, lists of buyers and sellers, and their crimes are written inside. If you turn us away, then you turn away every voice that died in those camps." Then Rue walked forward alone, her small hand raised, her voice soft and full of light, and she said, "I am Rue, and I choose to bond, not because I was told, but because I was saved, and my heart knows this is my family." The lights above shimmered, and the elders looked at each other, some with fear, some with guilt, and one finally stood and said, "By ancient law, if a bond is formed by choice, then the bonded are protected, and if harm comes to them, then war will answer." And just like that, the station changed from a hiding place to a shield, and Rue was no longer a target but a symbol. And Zari and Luma were no longer fugitives, but guardians, and Rian was no longer just a man but someone the stars now whispered about. They gave the girls safe names and safe beds and warm food, and a promise that the fight would spread, and Rian looked out at the stars. Later that night, knowing the syndicate would come, but they would not come quietly, and they would not win easily, because now they were a family forged pain, lit by hope, and bonded not by force but by choice. And in a galaxy full of shadows, the light they carried could burn like fire. The stars above Refuge Delta blinked softly, like they were finally at peace, and for the first time in many years, Ryan woke up to something other than silence or warnings. He woke to laughter, soft humming, and the smell of real food cooking in the small corner kitchen that Zari and Luma had set up inside their new living pod. Was spinning in the air, gently held by small anti-grav rings around her ankles, and she laughed as she floated down and landed in Ryan's arms, hugging him without a word, her light flickering like fireflies around them, and her voice whispering, "You slept late." Ryan smiled and said, "Maybe I needed to." And Rue grinned. "You snore." And Luma from the kitchen shouted loudly, "He shakes the whole pod." And they all laughed, because for once there was no fear in the room, no Shad waiting outside, and no blinking red light on the scanner. Zari came in with her hands on her hips, wearing a soft gray robe the council had gifted her, and her silver hair was tied back neatly, and her voice was calm but proud. We have council clearance to stay as citizens of the station, and you have been registered as our bonded guardian. She paused, then added with a smirk, "It's official now, you're stuck with us." Ryan didn't answer with words, he only reached for the small badge on the table, a silver crest with the symbol of chosen bond engraved on it, and pinned it to his chest without saying a word, because he already knew what it meant. And they did too. Later that day, the council held a quiet gathering where Rue was asked to sing not as a tool or performance, but as a guest of honor. And she stood on the stone floor in front of elders, traders, pilots, and orphans, and she opened her mouth and let her voice rise. Her song was not long and not loud, but it was warm and full of light and old pain and new joy, and even the guards wiped their eyes as light shimmered across the ceiling like stars dancing just for them. And when she finished, the room was silent until one voice whispered, "She is real, she is." Hobari spoke next, sharing stories from the camp, not with bitterness but with truth, and Luma showed how they rewired the Hunter's tech to disable syndicate signals, and one by one the crowd stopped seeing them as escaped property and started seeing them as fighters, as survivors, as family. The days that followed were quiet and kind. Rian helped farmers on the lower levels. Zari worked with refugees who had lost their homes. Luma built small learning toys for orphan children, and Rue spent her days singing to broken machines that somehow started working again after she touched them. One evening, as the red moon passed over the station, Ryan and Zari stood near the wide window watching the stars. And Zari said, "I never thought I would live to see a sunrise without chains." And Ryan replied softly, "I never thought I would call 3 alien girls my family." She turned to him, her eyes softer than he had ever seen, and said, "Thank you not for saving us but for seeing us." And Ryan didn't reply because he knew some words are better held than spoken. In another part of the station, Rue drew on the walls with glowing pens, making pictures of stars, trees, and people with their hands joined, and Luma added pieces of metal to make the pictures shine. And a passing pilot said, "You're making a home here?" And Rue replied, "This is our home now." The war wasn't over far away. The syndicate still hunted, still traded, still lied, but on this small station change had begun. Not with weapons or armies, but with a choice. One man opening a door, one girl offering a song, one broken chain becoming a bond, and in the heart of it all, a human, a soldier turned farmer, turned protector, stood watching over his strange new family, not as their master, not as their owner, but as their equal, their guardian, their bond. The galaxy would keep turning, and the darkness would still creep through corners, but the light was spreading, one safe place at a time, one voice at a time, one promise kept at a time. They had asked to be let in, and now they had something better, not just shelter, not just safety, but belonging. They were good girls, and now they were free.